大家好。Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this exciting event. I hope you feel it's exciting. And so I'm the moderator, Lili Lai. I'm the 2023 and 2024 Bulgarian Scholar and also Associate Professor at the School of Health Humanities of Peking University. It's a big honor here to moderate, to host Professor Judith Farquhar's talk. Meanwhile, I'm assigned a task to introduce the center and the speaker, of course, and about the lecture. So this is Bulgarian Seminar 27. The Bulgarian Research Center at Peking University was established in December 2018. Located at the heart of Peking University, the center engages with outstanding thinkers on its global platform to examine, share, and develop ideas to address planetary challenges in times of profound transformation. Intellectual themes for research programs are focused on frontier science, technology, and philosophy, creative futures, and ancient wisdom and planetary governance. The center funds a fellowship program, supports publications that feature its major research focuses, hosts activities such as lectures, workshops, and symposia, and produces multimedia outreach programs. I also can add, as a Bulgarian scholar, I have benefited very much from this program and from the center. I encourage everyone who's interested to apply to their fellowship. Now it's about our speaker. Professor Judith Farquhar is Max Palevsky Professor Emerita of Anthropology at the University of Chicago. She has studied the history and practice of traditional Chinese medicine in modern China and cultures of health and embodiment in both rural and urban China. Her most recent books, including a philosophical reflection on Chinese medicine from Yale University Press, A Way of Life, it has been translated into Chinese. A Way of Life, Things, Thought, and Action in Chinese Medicine, and ethnography co-authored with Lili Lai with me, Gathering Medicines, Nation and Knowledge in China's Mountain South. So today's lecture is about body, as you can tell from the title here. And also, Judy and I, we have been through a workshop on body. I know she will have a lot to share with everyone here. And the abstract she has been sharing with us for the lecture is this. The famous mind-body dualism of a Western-dominated modernity has a genealogy going back to classical times. But it was René Descartes who rendered the distinction between body and mind most clear and distinct. The common sense categories we share in global modernity remain strongly dualist despite many challenges from philosophers, artists, historians, and theorists. The authority of modern biomedicine is partly to blame. How have the modern sciences, like medicine, carved up reality to preserve the centrality of mind, while leaving body as its troubled and non-explicit other? What varieties of body or forms of embodiment can we acknowledge and enjoy as global contemporaries? So that's my job and for the opening remarks. Now let's welcome Professor Judith Farquhar.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Professor Lai mentioned that she and I have just finished yesterday a short workshop on questions of body and embodiment with 21 very talented humanities scholars and social sciences scholars from around China. In that workshop, we asked the participants to read various texts for the body, to look for the body, something like the body, in a number of historical materials, and then to present their findings as teams. In all the presentations we saw no body in the usual sense, no naked bodies, no anatomical bodies, no bodies separate from their environments, no bodies that were not embedded in social relations. So I feel particularly moved to be talking about body again tonight after our workshop, because the students in the workshop had so much more to say than I do. And moreover, I'm not a philosopher. This is a philosophy talk, but I'm a humble anthropologist. Yet I am interested in the title for this talk, Fundamental Concepts in Philosophy, Body. Let's see. This title raises many questions for me. Is body, or even shanti, a fundamental concept for philosophy? Is body just one concept? Is philosophy a unitary field with clear foundations? What's the difference between a fundamental concept for a field and an explicit argument? Actually, answering these questions would require research in intellectual history, or at least some very careful textual analysis, and perhaps some field research among philosophers. I'm not going to do any of that today. Instead, let me give you a brief outline of the list, or a sort of a list of the things that I'll touch on today, as I try to get to some notion of a body in some kind of philosophy. I'm most interested, as an anthropologist, I'm most interested in the philosophical foundations of everyday common sense. Common sense for moderns is made up of widely shared but massively contradictory assumptions about the nature of reality. Okay, assumptions, but they're shared. We all think that we know what common sense is among people of our sort, but we don't even notice how contradictory some of the ideas that we hold to be good assumptions are. We presume that our one shared world usually amounts to a collection of things that can be taken as a given, ready to hand, but mostly outside of our attention. Common sense and all its humble things, objects, or entities, everything that goes without saying in a shared world, is charged with ideology, I think I'm saying here, just a second, is charged with ideology, even a philosophy that has developed in history and continues to evolve. For example, the radical philosophy and the Birmingham cultural studies theorists in the 1970s and 80s showed that bourgeois English common sense was a product of the historical work of a class-marked utilitarian ideology that tended to advance the interests of the socially powerful. Lai Lili has attacked modern Chinese common sense about hygiene and rural villages, showing how common sense ideas about clean bodies and clean spaces arise from persistent urban class prejudice. Common sense naturalizes and normalizes things that, if we examine them, we would need to question them and relativize them. We would need to interrogate the things that we thought were just givens of everyday life. Common sense is, as Roland Barthes said, history turned into nature. I've spent most of my research life engaging with the discourses and practices of Chinese medicine in China, in modern China. Because of the historical situation of Chinese medicine as a form of medicine struggling for legitimacy in a scientific world, there has always been a philosophical dimension to my scholarship. Modern Chinese medical authors tend to speak of theoretical foundations, but they craft these foundations from classical Chinese cosmology, epistemology, ethics, and metaphysics. So these theorists can certainly be considered to be philosophers. By the time I'm finished tonight, I hope I will have introduced a Chinese medical philosophical quasi-concept of body that I find promising for the future of thought and action. But first, I want to give you a personal origin story. I clearly remember the moment when I truly saw the historical relativity and contingency of human bodies. I was in the hard berths section of a train bound north from Guangzhou in 1983, early in the morning, looking out the corridor window. I was reflecting at the time on my teacher, Jean Komaroff's injunction to find the body in medical worlds. And I was also considering the achievements of Ted Kapchuk, an author on Chinese medicine, in his then recently published book, The Web That Has No Weaver. Thinking about these points of view on Chinese medicine, I just decided, in China, there is no body. This crashing insight made me laugh right there, all by myself in the train. After all, objectively, there are and were lots and lots of bodies in China. Whether we simply count heads in a census or consider the many approaches to embodiment found in several thousand years of Chinese literature, China has got to be considered one of the greatest producers of human bodies and of accounts of human bodies in the world. But in the translingual practice between Sinophone or Chinese-speaking and Anglophone worlds, translators have stumbled over how to speak of the body. For modernists, Shanti comes readiest to hand when we speak of the body recognized by demographers and biomedicine. Our most philosophical scholars, however, have preferred to see this compound as referring to a social self. Mindful of the importance of shoshan or self-cultivation as a time-honored Confucian practice, Shanti must be translated as something like the substantial form of the social self. This is an awkward translation that raises more problems than it resolves. The substantial form of the social self leads to the Platonic problem of the difference between, or the relation between, ideal forms and material substances. Substitutes in Chinese for the Shanti body are interesting but more seldom used. Roti sounds kind of like food. Renti could mean almost anything. Many other alternatives are rather technical and relate to particular fields, like sculpture or athletics or pathology. It was the English word body, rather than any of these modern Chinese translations, that led me to conclude that I would not find the body in China. What is this common sense Anglophone body that I was failing to find in the worlds of Chinese medicine? In English, body has some important partners: body and soul, mind-body dualism, psychosomatic, or mind-body medicine. The word tends to take its meaning from what it is not. But these dualist partnerships remain a little incoherent when expressed in Chinese, especially when you consider that the Chinese words for mind and brain are thoroughly, in etymology, material and organic. So we have xin and xinli, we have now and now dai. It's hard to be an idealist when speaking of Chinese embodiment. But even acknowledging these complexities in Sinophone experience, we are all modernists in some respects, no matter how much we profess amodern or postmodern ideologies. That means we are heirs of European Enlightenment secularism and also of the global authority of empiricist biomedicine. One part of the workshops that Lily and I ran last week, last week, was a history of empiricism, a history of the kind of knowledge that is arrived at through the observation of the sense and the sense perception of phenomena taken to be an objective other to the knowing subject. So I can't go into that much here, but I would argue that I am arguing here that biomedicine is empiricist in that way that divides the knowing subject from the perceived object. We have received in medical and scientific practice Descartes' sorting of the human into privileged subjective mind and observed objective body. I'm just going to take this slide off for a bit. That's just, whoops, that's not what I want. Okay, there, okay. So let's turn to the European canon for a moment. Can we find the body there? The obvious first place to look is René Descartes, who famously divided mind from body. Extending the contemporary views of William Harvey, Descartes redefined the body in terms of the wholly contained circulation of the blood. Descartes' innovation was to say the circulation of blood circulates entirely within the skin, and therefore it makes an autonomous system separate from mind. Descartes rendered the mobility of the body mechanical, and he reduced the body philosophically to the status of a material thing. He made the body clear and distinct. He made it discrete, but he refused any mindfulness that bodies might claim. Thus, Descartes didn't like to think about faculties and processes like imagination and memory, because they tended to blur the line he was drawing, dividing consciousness and human being from mere automatic existence. In dividing body from mind in this way, did he leave body in place as the fundamental concept of philosophy? No. Rather, he expelled body from philosophy. His account of human being disavowed the body in order to elevate the mind as disembodied knower, as subject. Contemporary readers of Descartes have characterized the Cartesian body as a necessary supplement to the privileged positivity, the privileged existence of mind. Elizabeth Gross, for example, says, body is what the mind must expel in order to retain its integrity. It's okay, I want it to be black. So, in order to retain its integrity. In that sense, then, the body might be foundational to philosophy, but only as the occluded other to thought, a mute object in the environment of the living, experiencing, mental subject. So, not a philosophical concept, then. Of course, we know that embodiment did not lose its importance for the knowledge worlds of early modern and Enlightenment periods in Europe. The early anatomists dissecting corpses received a secularized body. Let's say they received it from Descartes. A secularized body, a body that was most natural, most revealing, only when death had put a stop to its activity and severed it from its social environment. Foucault and other historians have described the way in which the gaze of medical men focused ever more intimately on the inward body, the organs, networks, and tissues revealed to inspection and description in the anatomy theater. In The Slow Rise of Anatomy and the Biomedical Clinic, the status of the human body as object presented to the subject gaze of the expert knower was maintained and strengthened. I can't resist saying that, telling you about my teachers of Chinese medical history in the 1980s in Guangzhou used to tell me that they like to compare the body of modern biomedicine with the body known to traditional Chinese medicine. They would say, biomedicine, obsessed with anatomical structure and mechanical function, knows only the dead body, the body they can dissect. Chinese medicine, by contrast, learns from the living body, with all its manifestations of healthy physiology, 生理学, or active pathology, 病理学. And actually, these two terms, 生理学and 病理学, were very rapidly and comfortably adopted by Chinese medical thinkers, I think partly because of this linking word li with its fundamental idea of a pattern, a superficial, visible pattern. Given that Chinese medicine is a clinical art, doctors can only know from reading the bodily expressions brought to the attention of the doctor. I'm going to return to this idea briefly in a bit. But if Descartes resorted existence into mind as the proper field of philosophy and body as the proper object of medicine, and in the 20th century biological science, what was the fate of the lived body in philosophical writing? Of course, philosophers fought back against the growing hegemony of the Cartesian mind-body and subject-object divide. We need only mention Nietzsche, and for understanding Nietzsche's body, you could do worse than to look at Wang Minan's book, 尼采的身体. Is that the 尼采与 and you身体. Okay, 尼采与身体. Okay. But there are lots of other studies of the carnality, passion, willfulness, suffering, and irrationality in Nietzsche's philosophy. Turning to the lived body, we think immediately of Merleau-Ponty and his phenomenological comrades, Husserl and Heidegger. These writers worked so hard to overcome or undermine the dualism of the subject-object divide. Their explorations of experience returned our attention to everyday human embodiment, faculties and practices shared between philosopher-writer and embodied reader. At their most radical, they sought to expand the field of personal experience, to subsume the object world as a comprehensively subjective imaginary. Although I'm not sure about that move myself. I think that's a little problematic. And then there are pragmatists like William James and John Dewey, so influential in both the United States and China. Roger Ames, in a delightful article that on a thing he calls body-heart minding, right. Lovely word, has recently discussed Dewey and James and their efforts to defeat the mind-body dualism of a substance ontology. This substance ontology is what these early 20th century thinkers inherited from objectivist science of the body and idealist philosophy of the mind. Of course, Dewey and James were both treating psychology as a kind of a bridge discipline between body and mind. But Ames suggests that even these inspiring pragmatists do not go far enough to achieve a holistic process a holistic process cosmology. Such a process cosmology would be needed to restore, perhaps, a concept of the body at the foundations of philosophy. Before I leave the pragmatists behind, I cannot resist following Ames's lead in emphasizing the gerundive character of human being. Gerundive, what's the Chinese for that? Dongmingce. Dongmingce, yeah. Ames's own phrasing puts the body, heart, and mind in motion with the ing of body, heart, minding. Right? He's making it a gerund. It's an action word. He quotes Dewey on this process ontology. Oh, this should be the Dewey slide, right? Yes. Where does he quote Dewey? The organism is not just a structure. It is a characteristic way of interactivity, which is not simultaneous all at once, but serial. That is, it's temporal. It happens through time. It is a way impossible without structure for its mechanism, but it differs from structure as walking differs from legs or breathing from lungs. I have elsewhere quoted William James as saying something similar, but even more radical. There is no I, there is only the seeing. There is no I, there is only the seeing. I have sometimes wanted to say, there is no bladder, there is only the peeing. There is no body, there is only the being. Okay. This consideration of some modern philosophical resistances to the inherited dualism of a science-object body and a philosophy-subject mind has brought us back to me on the train from Guangzhou. A world of experience in Chinese medicine, a world full of pulses and tongue images, fevers and chills, nightmares and insomnia, bleeding, sweating, worrying, touching, fearing, shivering, aching, itching, and so much more. This world had presented to me, who was an heir of Descartes and biomedicine, had presented to me no body. Yet my advisor and I had expected, since I had come to China to study a form of medicine, that certainly I would find a body at the foundations of Chinese medicine. A contingent body, of course, one that could be compared with the anatomical, biological body of biomedicine. But that comparison has proven to be a dead end, or perhaps a competition in which traditional Chinese medicine can only lose the race. I've said that neither modernist, objectivist philosophy, nor modern science has defined the body in a philosophical language. But Chinese medicine has. I will turn to one Chinese medical approach to embodiment in a moment. If there were time, I could provide a little history showing why, in the 20th century, this practical field of Chinese medicine turned to philosophy in a way that remains almost impossible for medicine in the West. Philosophy of medicine in the West, if you look at the sources, the main sources, and I have published in some of them, is ethics. It's about the relationship between medical people and sufferers. It's not about basic metaphysics, ontology, cosmology. It's not about philosophy in the way that Chinese medicine is about philosophy. After all, Descartes' division between philosophy mind and science body continues to rule our common sense at the foundation. But in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s in China, experts in Chinese medicine were well aware that in the eyes of the world, their knowledge was nothing better than superstition and mythology. Even though Chinese medicine was officially approved and supported after 1956 in China, international observers and domestic Chinese modernizers were still insisting that the basic things of Chinese medicine were illusory, not real, not things at all. qi, jingluo, sanjiao, that kind of thing. Of course, what was meant by this insistence was that these bodily things are not visible and tangible to anatomy. They could not be found in the anatomical body. Thinkers of Chinese medicine found that the proper level for fighting back was not in the empiricist's language of objective observational science, but rather in the idioms of philosophy. In the 1980s in Guangzhou, my teachers often urged me to read in the areas of epistemology, 认知论, methodology, 方法论, systems theory, 系统论, and even pragmatics, 实用主义. Students of Chinese medicine today, I've discovered in some conversations, tend to be mystified by these words. Their teachers are more interested in 科学化, in scientization. It's also important for this little history that Chairman Mao was a philosopher. His philosophical essays of the 1930s helped defenders of Chinese medicine separate theory from practice in their own field, allowing them to link the classic cosmological writings to modern clinical practice, and to privilege practice and experience over cognition and objectivity. Like John Dewey, these Chinese doctors found legitimacy in practice. I want to conclude with a Chinese medical approach to embodiment proposed by one of these philosophical and clinical defenders of the world of Chinese medicine. Lu Guangxin was first educated in Chinese medicine in Shanghai before 1949, but he later earned a degree in Western medicine in Beijing. Much of his career was spent in the Department of Theoretical Foundations of Chinese Medicine at the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, and in the last decade or so of his life, he focused on varieties of self-healing on the part of sufferers or patients. In 2000, he wrote a polemical preface to a book of his collected essays. This is a fascinating text that mixes many idioms, including 1980s Chinese humanism, ecology, biology, ancient Chinese cosmogony, and Maoist rhetoric. The whole preface is an exhortation to do better. It sounds like propaganda, not only to be better doctors, but also to be more ethical and more committed and more energetic servants of the people in any field. Early in the essay, he says, Mr. Zhang Taiyan emphasized, the way is not far from the human. Let the body of the patient be your revered teacher. Basically then, we should learn from those whom we ourselves serve. And the word here for those people is duixiang. We should learn from those duixiang whom we ourselves serve, and we should seek to develop in the midst of practice. Here, Lu Lao uses a somewhat unconventional word for people or bodies, duixiang. What is a duixiang in ordinary life? It's an object of our attention, but also a partner in perception. It is the image we face, but it is also the object that talks back to us, that can be our revered teacher. Further, when Lu Guangxin says we should seek to develop in the midst of practice, who is the we he's talking about? It is fellow practitioners of Chinese medicine, for sure, but perhaps other kinds of experts as well. It is certainly not the Cartesian knowing subject, drawn apart from the inert object of knowledge, the body known to science. At the end of the essay, Lu returns to the body using the same term, quoting Zhang Taiyan again. Consequently, the way of Chinese medicine insists, the way is not far from the human. Let the body of the patient be your revered teacher. Then he follows this up with some slogans. The way of Chinese medicine at root is the study of humans. When he says at root, is he referring to theoretical foundations, to fundamental concepts? Perhaps he is. Learn from the object, the duixiang, of your own service. That is to say, learn from your patients. Learn from people who seek your help. Learn from those sufferers who are actually quite active in trying to alter their illness. Learn from the objects, the duixiang, on which medicine and pharmacy depend. Would that be herbal medicines? Might it be clinical signs from lab results? Maybe textbooks? Learn from the objects, the duixiang, that develop in medicine. That might be disease processes, immune responses, healing itself. Learn in the midst of life nurturing, Yangsheng, and illness treating, Zhibing practice. Seek personal development from practice, he says. This turn to practice at the end of the preface may be the voice of the old Maoist in Lu Guangxin, but it is a practice stuffed with active partners of knowing and acting. It also invokes for me the anti-dualism of the American pragmatists James and Dewey, and even Roger Ames. There is a body being proposed here, seen as the human being, that key entity that can found a field, Chinese medicine. This is a body that has evolved in China for both science and philosophy. It is certainly not illusory. It is very real, material, and yet it is irreducibly relational and processual. It is an active and changing body. It is my body and your body. It is a body that expresses and communicates, that teaches and learns, that grows and falls ill. Inspired by Chinese medicine leaders like Lu Guangxin, I have begun to avoid even speaking of body, and I certainly don't worry too much about mind. Rather, I'd like to put life as the source and wellspring of both medicine and philosophy. And of course, Lu Guangxin is way ahead of me. He declares that the way of Chinese medicine is sheng sheng zhi dao. And on that untranslatable note, I'd like to leave body behind.
Now it's a Q&A session. Maybe I'll start, Paul Zhen Yinyu. Then everyone welcome to ask questions. And also I know we have people online.
Should you hold the mic a little further from you? It's getting feedback.
Yes, when you're talking to
Yeah, I know.
it's better. Yeah. Okay. So it's wonderful. Thank you. Also, I noticed you to the end, and then you moved from body to life. And it's basically you start with there's no body in China, and you end with there's no body. Is that understanding right? Because although we're
well, I think I end with there is embodiment in China. There are carnal processes. Carnal means fleshy, bodily. You know, there are carnal processes in China, of course, but the body which can be taken to be universal, the universal object of the scientific gaze. I still believe that's not really here, at least in the worlds of Chinese medicine. And I might also be saying that to make a theme out of the body in medicine is more boring than talking about sheng sheng zhi dao.
So maybe in the audience, please feel free to ask questions in Chinese as well. I can help you. Okay, there's one in the back.
Hi, Professor Farquhar and Professor Lai. Well, question about the intersection of cultural practices and your philosophy of the concept of body. For example, I remember in Andy's film Pushing Hands, Play Show, there is a significant scene that highlights the cultural clash between the East and the West over the traditional Chinese medicine, just as you have mentioned several times in your speech. The scene is like the elderly character used the cupping, the 拔罐, on his back to relieve his comfort, but his daughter-in-law, Western daughter-in-law, misinterprets the marks left by cupping as signs of abuse and family violence. So I'm wondering whether we can take this conflict exemplifies the difference in how the body and its treatment are perceived in Chinese and Western culture. Like in Chinese tradition, cupping is seen as a beneficial treatment for various ailments, whereas in the Western medicine context, you can't just put it in some standard or in some healing books that you can't check it in any scientific databases. So we can view it as skepticism or misunderstanding. So I want to hear the views from both professors, like how do you think these cinematic cultural reviews relates to your ideas and concepts about body, like the body as a cultural and social construct, or specifically, how does this scene illustrate the body as a side of cultural practice, the power dynamics involved in medical knowledge, and the subjective experience of the body? 这是我的问题，大概就是听了两位教授的演讲之后，就突然让我联想到李安导演《推手》里面的一个场景，大概就是男主角也不算是男主角，就是一位中年男性，他到了美国去找他的儿子之后，他觉得他身体很难受，他是一位太极师傅，然后他就给自己用了拔罐，让自己变得舒服一点，然后结果他的女婿，不是他女婿，他的媳妇一看就以为他爸爸遭遇了暴力，然后就觉得很害怕，然后我就在想，这样的一种冲突是不是就是我的脑回路，我也不知道如何把它联系在一起，所以就是会很好奇教授会如何解答和认识这个问题。因为教授也有强调，身体它不仅是一个需要被条条框框来衡量的东西，因为在中医里面，它也是一个主观能动性，就是我们说在这个文化里面，我们就是痛了，我们就是累了，那我们就用自己的方式让它舒服起来。我也不知道我理解到不到位，反正我就是这么随便一问，大家就随便一听。谢谢大家。
I think I want to take issue with your using the notion of culture to talk about this antagonism, this conflict, this contradiction that emerges in the encounter of various social situations with Chinese medicine. And I think that cupping is a good example of one thing I was talking about, which is the problem of the things of Chinese medicine. So that it's not as if biomedicine doesn't also do damage to the body in its therapeutics, right? The biomedical elective surgery practices or minor surgery practices can leave just as startling a wound on the body as cupping does. And yet, because that kind of operation is done by biomedical doctors on a body that is anatomically known as in the classical European way, this is not considered to be a problem or an act of violence. While cupping, because it's drawing qi, it's drawing heat, it's doing something, it's causing a process, initiating and continuing a process which is not recognized as rational by the biomedically trained people. So it's a problem of the ontology of the things of the body that is it's not understood and not accepted in the world of biomedicine. The world of biomedicine is restrictive and reductive. So there might be all kinds of therapies coming from many traditions that would be a useful addition to the work of biomedicine. But because biomedicine has this very narrow interpretation of their material domain of work, which is the body first known most fully to anatomy, because they have this very restrictive definition of what their field is, there are all kinds of treatments that can't be admitted to a biomedical clinic. No, that doesn't answer all of your question, but I hesitate to say this is cultural clash, because I think people are not stupid. They can figure out when they're operating in a different cultural situation and try to adapt.
Yeah, I remember it's a U.S. The very famous swimmer Philip Phelps. When he often show his cutting marks, right, on his body. It's a Western body. So yes, like Judy said, but I think your question basically is also resonating with there's no one body, and the daughter-in-law is acting like she assumes there's only one body, but actually her father-in-law already shows her there's many bodies, and you cannot just judge using your idea of the body to judge the other people's body. So that can be I often call that ontological politics, and she's acting on. Yeah. Also in the back.
Hi, thank you for the great talk. So I have two questions. So first one is that, as you mentioned before, it's about politics by Michel Foucault. I'm wondering, so in the Foucault state that the bigger hierarchy or system or state might affect on on bodies, but I'm wondering in more in the notion of traditional Chinese or in a more traditional Chinese context, how these bigger systematic existence effects on bodies. And the other question is that, and in the West, there's a very popular concept about post-humanism and modern human entities, and I would like to know how the Chinese traditional medicine notion of the body responds or resonates with these concepts. Many things.
So on biopolitics, that's quite interesting. I haven't found it easy to think the worlds of Chinese medicine in a biopolitical framework, but it is. I'm finding in the United States right now that that there's a kind of imperative to use advanced biomedical care that even people who would rather ignore it, rather find alternative medicine, are discouraged from adopting that strategy. So the imperative to use the most advanced technical medicine available is, I feel, a biopolitical trend. And I see it a lot more I see it in the United States, and I'm sure it exists here too. I'm not sure how Chinese medicine would play into that, because Chinese medicine is not, it's not disciplinary in that way. On the second question was about post-human body. Post-human. Oh yes. Well, this is quite a nice question for thinking about Lu Guangxin, because he was, I could tell from his language, his ecological kind of language, and his broad biological interests in his essays, that he was well aware that it would be possible to be post-human using Chinese philosophical and Chinese medical conceptual resources. But he makes a very concerted decision to commit himself to the human in that preface and in a number of his other writings. So he's post-human in the sense that he's returning to humanism by choice as a politics. But he certainly is participating in a world in which the life of animals, plants, and environments and atmospheres is also very, very important and can be used to decenter the human. He's saying, we're doctors, we have to recenter the human. And this is in 2000.
Oh, thank you so much for the really provocative lecture. I just have a comment and then a question. So, because I remember you were saying that in the Western medicine, typically people just teach ethics in the medical school, right? Rather than, they don't really think about metaphysics or ontology of Western medicine. So it's very interesting. Just recently, I spoke to somebody who teaches, who's a philosopher by training, but he's teaching in medical school of Harvard University. And I was really intrigued by that. I said, what are you teaching? You know, what kind of philosophy are you teaching? And he says, oh, you know, it's not what you think. I just teach ethics. So that's exactly what you're saying. However, I do think the fact that there's lack of, philosophical kind of teaching in the medical school, that precisely speaks to kind of a, you can say, ontological confidence, back to Professor Lai's comment about ontological politics. You can say the ontological confidence or kind of a self-conceit about the foundations of a medicine. I mean, clearly it is about, maybe it's dualism, right? It is about mind-body things. They're absolutely sure that's the universal truth. I don't even have to teach about it. It's self-evident. Anyway, that's just, when you make that comment, that just made me think of this episode. So the question I have is...
Can I just say something about that
sure,
first?
Absolutely.
And then I'll let you ask your question after that, okay?
Sure, absolutely.
I contributed a piece about Chinese medicine to a big, thick volume from Routledge called A Source Book for Philosophy and Medicine. And if you look at all the articles in that volume, there are a lot of them about ethics, but there are a lot of them that are sociology and cultural history and all manner of other disciplines. There's almost nothing which interrogates the epistemological foundations of medicine, and certainly not the ontological foundations of medicine, of biomedicine. So I think that's my convenient go-to resource for insisting that philosophy and medicine is a kind of impoverished field in biomedicine. But, there's a journal called Philosophy and Medicine. It started up in about 1982, and the Chinese journal, by the same name in Chinese, started up in about the same year. And the Chinese journal actually did do philosophy of medicine. And so that's a project I'd like to do, is follow through the Chinese journal to see what and they were both biomedical and Chinese medical writers who were exploring the philosophical dimensions of their field. Okay, what's your question?
Sorry, can I have a comment on your comment? I don't know how much time we have. But anyway, just thinking, if you look at philosophy or history and then even arts, and then nowadays they come to realize that there are other different kinds of philosophies and arts and then in the histories. So rather than say history 101 or philosophy 101, nowadays they're a lot more sensitive to say, okay, maybe we should call ourselves Western philosophy rather than whatever, right? So that kind of thinking seems to be really slow coming in the medical field. So anyway, so it's a comment on your comment. The question is about, there's no body in Chinese medicine. It's fascinating. And then I'm also sort of thinking, I don't know whether you two think it's kind of a right way of thinking, is the fact that there is no strong, version of a body in Chinese medicine. Maybe it's because in the Chinese philosophy and culture, it emphasizes more of embeddedness. It's relational, and it's obviously not dualistic. And then so in a way, it's emphasizing your relationship with nature, and then with the social networks and this and that. The fact that you're sick, of course, the yin yang kind of imbalance, and then qi and this and that. So in a way, there's a lot more sort of broader social or maybe environmental reasons for your problems, rather than just the kind of a bounded entity of an individual. I don't know. Maybe is that right in thinking that kind of contributes to the quote unquote lack of a strong concept of body in Chinese medicine?
It's part of it. It's
okay.
part of it.
Okay, and then another question is, related is that, but Chinese philosophy, and it does have, you mentioned it, the concept of shen, right? 身体的身. So this shen, I'm just curious, in Chinese medicine, in all these thousands of years of practice, this 身体的身 was never really featured in that context. And then I'm just, there's a question, I don't know. It's a historical question, I suppose. And then also when obviously, clearly, Chinese doctors, when they treat you, they need to, cure your disease, right? So what's the equivalent of the individual body kind of thing that in Chinese medicine they may use? I don't know. They still have to treat you as somewhat like an individual, right? One way or another. What is the thinking process? Is there any equivalent set of concepts that can largely equate the concept of body in the Western philosophy? Or maybe there's none. I just want to press this issue a little further. Thank you.
I think there is. The Chinese doctors have no problem being moderns, any more than or Chinese people in other educations, in other specialties. We all find ways of speaking Chinese of being very modern, and the modernity, such as it is, has relied on a notion of the individual, the embodied individual, given to us, Foucault argues, by the rise of medicine in the 19th century. And that individual is the individual who is not society. Individual and society is the couple taken up by sociology, psychology, and most of the social sciences in the late 19th and in the 20th century. And it's been quite complicated to overcome those taken for granted things. The individual, I could have done a whole talk on the individual. Instead, I did it on the body. But I'm not sure, I've forgotten what your question is in a way.
In treatment.
What?
In treatment with the body, when it's in medical intervention,
Yeah.
got to be on the body. Then if there's no body in Chinese medicine, how does treatment
There
go?
can be incarnation. There can be embodiment. And I think even in the most mundane way, a Chinese doctor doesn't think he's working on a whole body, or she is working on a whole body. They're addressing a certain process, which they can identify from the symptoms and the history, and they're working on that aspect of things, and they're waiting to see if their intervention helps, if it makes a difference in this identified process of, for example, rising heat. When you're treating rising heat in a patient, you're not treating the whole person. You're not giving. Certainly, your treatments can be systemic, but they're not meant to be about this shanti, you know. They're about a natural process which happens to be taking place in this present person, and you work on that, and it's very complicated, of course, as everyone knows. It takes a long time. You have to keep coming back and seeing if what you've done works, and so forth. But I certainly there is a person, there is an individual and a sufferer who goes into the Chinese doctor's clinic and receives an herbal prescription or takes an acupuncture treatment or something like that. There's no problem with that. But this is not the body. This is a kind of a node in a network of phenomena. So. But I don't like to give a positive answer to the question of what is the body in Chinese medicine, because then it shuts down other possibilities.
Okay. This one?
First of all, thank you for your great lecture. My question is like, I feel a little ambiguous about how we talk about China and the West, because I can sense that there are similar patterns or philosophical ideas about traditional Chinese medicine, like this combination of body and mind. This kind of pattern also occurs in like Arabian culture or Tibetan culture or indigenous American culture. So can we consider that this difference between the so-called Western and Chinese division is actually a kind of division between different kind of social formations, like they adapt to or they emerge from different kinds of society, or is this just a division between pre-modern and modern society? I don't know if I can think of this like that. Thank you.
Not the latter. Not the latter. It's not a division between
definitely not the latter.
Modern society.
Can we think of it as the former? Like maybe it's not a division between pre-modern or modern society. They're just ideas emerging from different kinds of society. Because I feel that this kind of philosophical idea it's not exclusive in China. It's also similar in like Arabian or Tibetan or Indian culture. So how can you explain that?
I'm having a little trouble with this with this question.
你可以用汉语说。你的意思是说，如果只有中西，那如何我们看待印度医学、其他医学，是这个意思吗？
我的问题大概意思就是说，这种中国传统医学类似的模式不是中国独有的，就是像很多其他文化中都有。那么我们怎么解释这种是怎么产生的？是不是因为不同的社会形态？
是不同什么社会形态？
对，或者是不同的文化形态这样的。
So back to cultural question.
Yeah. But there are social and there are differences in social situations right across whole terrains. When Lili and I traveled to the south to work on minority medicine, 少数民族医药, we find ourselves in a very different environment than Beijing. And we're looking at a very different medicine than the TCM that's taught in Beizhongyi. And so, yes, sure, there's a correlation or a deep link between the social situation where a medicine is practiced and its the things it takes to be real and the actions it takes to be proper. Of course that's the case. But I think that we want to be careful not to make big global claims about Thai society or Iranian society or Chinese society or American society and then start contrasting these great big global things. That doesn't work. We have social difference right across the whole terrain of all nation states. Okay.
Thank you. I feel like this is more of a personal reflection rather than a question. So I'm currently learning counseling psychology. Should I be standing up? I'll stand up. Okay. So like currently I'm learning counseling psychology, and there's like a huge counseling psychology. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's like a huge emphasis on like other ways of knowing in our programs. For example, we learn about like neo-colonialism and post-colonialism, and how like the epistemology from European modernity has dominated the field of psychology and counseling psychology. But at the same time, I feel like there's a huge discrepancy between the things we've been learning and my personal experience. So for example, we've talked about all those alternative ways of knowing, like traditional medicines and acupuncturists even. But at the same time, we are learning, like in our actual counseling theories course, we're learning CBT, which is a European form of modality, and all the other sort of traditional counseling theories. And one big thing about those theories is that they are all sort of evidence-based. That's like a huge word, a huge thing in counseling psychology right now. It has to be tested, repeated, and like randomized controlled trials and all that in order to be accepted by the field. So, and for me as well, like I wanted to try more things. I wanted to try more traditional Chinese healing techniques, but there's no way of me to learn those stuffs and apply them in a confident way. And when I tried to do that, one, there's no source of learning that. And another huge thing is that I feel this really deep anxiety when I want to do that. Like there's sort of like a comfort in applying the empirical, like randomized controlled trial way of knowing to our clients. So yeah, I just don't really. I'm having an existential problem, crisis right now. Like I wanted to apply more things. But
well, there's this huge psychology in contemporary China, has been for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very interesting. And I don't think you're doing anything wrong by using standardized global methods in treating people with psychological complaints or seeking therapy. But the thing to bear in mind is that the therapy may be producing the very object that's suffering. The therapy may be producing the psyche, may be producing the mental domain, the mental field that is suffering distress. And that's fine. It's probably effective, but it's an emergent process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something in which you're discovering, your psychotherapy teachers are discovering that, oh, look, Chinese people had minds too, had psyches too,
Yeah.
right? And all that silly holism in Chinese medicine is not relevant because we're discovering that there are these suffering minds that we can treat with our psychological processes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, of course you are, but in that discovery process, you're producing the thing to be treated.
Yeah, so you think it's going to get better in the future?
Well, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Because like logically, like in a rational way, I know I should try more things, but intuitively, I just, I've been, although I'm Chinese, but I've been so exposed to the Cartesian way of knowing, of thinking, I can't even really conceptualize.
The purity of mind.
Yeah.
Which is even now, I'm glad to hear you say that because I really believe that even now the mind is pretty purified for our therapeutics. But there's a scholar named Zhang Yanhua who has written a book called Transforming Emotions in Chinese Medicine, and she continues to write and publish about the treatment of mental distress with Chinese medicine. And she's a really good anthropologist and a really good philosopher, and she's a really good linguist. And so I recommend her work to help you think this through.
What's the name again? It's
Zhang Yanhua. Transforming emotions in Chinese medicine.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. There was a question in the back here. Right. Yes, that one.
Thank you so much for
Hi.
the wonderful lecture.
This is my friend. That's why we have to hear this question.
I have a question about the culture translation. As we know, there's a much differences between the epistemology underlying Chinese medicine and scientific approaches. And Chinese medicine researchers, doctors, and stakeholders are trying to use many ways to build bridges between themselves and the others.
So the Chinese doctor is building bridges between herself and her patient.
Others. That means the people with scientific epistemology.
Oh, I see. Okay. I see. Okay.
People who believe in scientific epistemology.
Yeah.
And in such process, scientific language has been main methods for them to achieve mature understanding. But in such process, the hegemony of scientific epistemology is reproduced. And I was wondering if there's any ways to avoid the reproduction of the hegemony of scientific epistemology.
This is a very interesting question to me because my first book, Knowing Practice, was all about the epistemology of Chinese medicine. And in the conclusion of that book, I talked about practice and how an direct consideration of practice, healing practice, should be something that all medical people have in common. And that the frustrations and the joys of finding your way in practice through the treatment of an illness should be something that biomedical doctors and Chinese medical doctors, all kinds of doctors, could talk about together and could share, and they could have that bridge. But after that book came out, it had absolutely no impact of that kind. And I kept on talking with people in biomedicine who would say, for example, the classic conversation I would have with my friends in the medical school at Chicago was, you work on Chinese medicine? Oh, that's nice. Does it work? And I say, well, yeah. Depends what you want, but yes, it works. And then they'd say, well, that's interesting. Too bad it's not real. Right? So they go to the epistemological, ontological level and say, but we know that all that stuff you talk about in Chinese medicine isn't real. We know that. And that's what they tell their patients and that tell everyone, And I don't see much that's overcoming that hegemony of a biomedical epistemology derived from the anatomy tradition.
But there was a moment, remember, in 50s, the 西学中, a lot of Western medicine doctors, when they started to learn Chinese medicine, they were fascinated, and then they converted themselves from Western medicine to Chinese medicine. They don't want to practice Western medicine any longer. They want to practice Chinese medicine because it's so intriguing, and they can keep learning for their whole life. And we heard a lot of these kind of stories. But how to counter that hegemony? Because they are required by the government, and they have to learn Chinese medicine. But when they were forced to learn Chinese medicine, they discovered it is very attractive. It is very interesting.
But not all of them did.
Now we lack that.
Some of them didn't.
That push. Okay.
I studied when I was in Guangzhou in the 82 to 84. I was with a class of Xishuazhong doctors, and they were all sophisticated, experienced Western medicine doctors from all over the province of Guangdong, and they had various responses to studying Chinese medicine. But, you know, many of them, Lily's right, many of them got kind of hooked. And it's partly because the work in the clinic of working with patients to find a way through therapeutically it's so much not like the protocols of biomedicine. It's not like, you know, you have this ontological disease. Okay, this is a case of COVID-19. Here's our standard procedure for treating it. You know, so these Xishuezhong doctors realized that, no, they could be real strategists in the clinic. They could play with the possible options, and they could do research in the archive and do research even in the forests with herbs, you know, to find better ways, more flexible ways.
That also it resonates with Bing's comment about, because there's no philosophy in medicine, it's boring, right? In Western medicine, but in Chinese medicine, you can always explore.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions. So, I read a book
我们前
yesterday.
面有一个人，这人，不好意思啊，他刚才他正在说话。
Oops, sorry. So we need a mic. Yeah.
Basically, I think Chinese traditional medicine and Western medicine, the different because of the different discourse system. Different discourse system, like 话语体系.
Different.
Discourse system.
Oh, different discourse. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Different discourse. And how can we transfer the information from one discourse system to another discourse system, another one? Because I think it's quite difficult to...
Translation.
Yeah,
it's a translation.
Transfer.
Translation is what I do. This is what anthropology does. And,
transfer knowledge from one system to
well,
another.
but to transfer knowledge requires, exactly as you say, it requires a translation of discourse. And that's really difficult. In my little book, Shengming Zhidao, I talk about Joseph Needham, the historian of science. I talk about his partner, Lu Guizhen's comments on translating Chinese medicine for volume 6. I waited all my career for this volume. It never really came out because it was going to be the medicine volume. Lu Guizhen came from a medical family. Her father and grandfather were herbalists, so she understood Chinese medicine, and she understood the Chinese language that was used to talk about Chinese medicine, and she understood the Chinese language in the historical books. But I talked to her. I was at the Needham Research Institute at one point, and I had a cup of tea with her, and I said, so when's the book going to come out? When are you going to give us your history of Chinese medicine in English for for all these serious sinologists? And she said, never. It's not possible to translate. It's not possible to translate, she said.
So how could we help people like in Western country? How could we let them know Chinese medicine? Because it's quite difficult.
Well, see, I didn't believe her. I went ahead and tried to do something like that. So possibly there are a few more books. Every once in a while another good book comes out that if people read it, they would change. They would see something, But I agree. If we're going to compare and share, transmit knowledge, it's a matter of dealing with the language in which we are working, and that's not easy for Chinese medicine. So Lily and I are planning on doing a project of translations at some point soon, some point in the next 4 or 5 years. There will be translations of influential Chinese medical writing in the contemporary period, and I can already see that it will be, each page will be 1/3 the translated text and 2/3 the footnotes, explaining, you know, all these foreign concepts. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there was a question back there.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions. I'll say it very briefly. So first one, I read a book yesterday which is about how in some regions in China, diseases are believed to be caused by some supernatural forces. So like ghosts or other like spiritual existence. So my question is, and speaking of the body and mind in China, how can we bring this kind of spiritual existence into our thinking? And my second question is a question that has confused me for so long. So I know many scholars are making a lot of efforts to try to transcend the mind-body binary, but I think they often take the example from like China and ancient China and maybe like Indians or other indigenous cultures. So how can we really transcend
the Orientalism of this process, right?
I wonder how can we really transcend this binary and modern Western culture?
Yeah.
Because the modern Western culture has so much influence on the other part of the world. Thank you.
You know, I think modern is your key word there. I think that there's so many differences in the world, and especially, well, when I look at medicine, I look at South Asian medicine. I look at, you know, I found a wonderful source on 18th century German women's medicine and how different it was. And there's you know, all kinds of medicines down in the South where Lily and I have worked that are quite unique. So there's so many differences in the world as it is. And yet we're constantly comparing Western and the others, right? It's an Orientalist formation, of course, and we'd really like to overcome that. But the problem is the claims of modernity, that the culture of modernism is so clear to us. We embody it. All of us do. We're all well-trained moderns. We understand science. We understand quantification. We understand the individual and society. We understand environmental concerns. You know, we're all moderns. But that kind of secular and scientific position in the world is not shared by everybody, and yet it claims to be the natural way to, the natural and proper and evolved way to be. So it's not a divide between past, you know, old and new, right? It's a divide between a modernist cultural claim to take up all the space of the natural, which makes it very difficult for a kind of therapeutics that involves ghosts and shamans and spirit mediums, you know, makes it very difficult for anything like that to be seen by the sciences. It can't be seen by the sciences. It's not a acceptable thing in the world. And so I don't think we need to so much try to incorporate, to add in all these, you know, non-modern, amodern practices that you mentioned. I don't think we should be trying to fold them in. What we should be trying to do is defeating modernism. I mean, that sounds kind of radical, but what we should be trying to do is to make the moderns, that's us, more capacious, more imaginative. We should be able to see and appreciate more. And that's what anthropology tries to do.
I can add a little bit. I just thought about the article by David Palmer. He mentioned Latour's comment in Icon Clash. And so it's still idea of we have never been more than. Yes, the ghost. Now in the primitive ones, they tend to explain something that is not directly they can name on or they can rely on as ghosts or something, and then they feel kind of assured, arrested. But moderns, we have society, right? What is society? We have those grand terms, but we think that's true, and we can perceive it. And Latour thinks that's the same with ghost. So it's the same thing. The ghost or society, they are all grand out there, and we kind of believe that's true. That can help us explain something we experience. Yeah. So maybe that also partially help with your question.
Do we have to go downstairs? We still have 5 more minutes? Okay, good. Are there other questions?
Thank you, Professor. My question is about from 19th centuries, we know the idealism or some subjectivism from Descartes to Hegel, they achieve absolute advantage in global world, and they rules our explanation for many main concepts like free will or reason of human or some spiritual. So, however, in nowadays in popular views or modern views, it is maybe antiquated and rotten, like a matron quote from like Kant. So is it possible to reconstruct a new metaphysics or named body metaphysics, include living body? And I remember Husserl used this word, living body, to answer
latent body?
Living body.
Okay.
Yeah, and to
latent.
No, living body.
What's that? Living body.
So to answer some question from like a logical positivism or some non-self physicalism, is it possible body like a realm of possibility to reconstruct a new metaphysics?
To craft a new metaphysics that can be more accommodating to to a more capacious idea of body?
Yeah, because some classical philosophers, they just emphasize mind. They just emphasize our spirit or God. And we can use some new concept like elements from Eastern philosophy, Tao or 天地.
Well, I think that people like Roger Ames and I, and a lot of people who are trying to come to terms with, in the case of China, Chinese discourses that are rich and suggestive for an alternative metaphysic, if by that you mean ontology plus cosmology plus epistemology, are doing that. I think, we use our language, we use our words, we use our eloquence to try to persuade people that they could have a different assumptive structure. They could take a different world to be the basis of their being and their efforts. But I think that that's also kind of a fool's errand, or it's kind of it's not going to happen. and it's because these assumptions that we live with are so deep-seated for us, we never examine them. So a talk like this, I'm trying to examine some of the assumptions about body, and so that we can be a little more aware of what we take for granted as body, and that's great. And in fact, one of the participants in our body workshop said to me when she was saying goodbye last night, she said, I feel like everything we've been talking about is helping me to reinvent my body. Well, great. I loved that. That was terrific. But I'm not optimistic that it's a generalizable experience. Back there? Did you have a? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, my question comes back to the translation. Just now you have mentioned that translation will play a very important role in promoting the mutual understanding between Western medicine and Chinese medicine. So I want to go back to that, the beautiful 4 characters you have left with us.
Yes.
生生之道. Can we challenge ourselves a little bit? You know, when we do that culture transmission, we have to translate the ideas into English so that other speakers will be able to understand us. So is it possible that we can challenge ourselves together, thinking about how to translate?
How to translate. That's great. I love it. It gets, you know, I've tried many translations of this 上上画画, 上上之道, 上上之气. I've tried many translations, and I'm not happy with any of them because they're all ugly. This is a beautiful 4-character phrase, right? You want to translate it into something beautiful, right? So I translated, the version I was working with, getting ready for this talk, I translated into abounding life. Abounding life, the way of abounding life. Well, I don't know, not that great, you know. And then there's the life that gives rise to more life. Oh, is that ugly or what? That's ugly, right? So I do think that finding the right translation is really a great project and very important, but sometimes.
Yeah, I understand too, that trauma of a translator.
The trauma of the translator.
Another language, beauty is lost.
Yeah. Beauty and elegance, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of what's your suggestion, since you have done so many years of translating traditional Chinese medicine, what do you think would be the techniques or certain new ideas of helping promoting the translation of traditional Chinese medicine into English? As I believe, you know, Chinese medicine knowledge is local knowledge. So to make it global, we need to do a lot of things to try to fix that gap. So what do you think, based on your experience, and what do you predict the future of the spreading of traditional Chinese medicine?
I can't predict the future, but I do think that Chinese medicine is becoming more and more global. And it, you know, even with bad translations. So you say that Chinese medicine is a local medicine, and I want to take, I want to go somewhere with that, because the Chinese medicine, when it's translated into English by clinicians working in the United States, I read what they write. I read their case notes. I read their advertisements on the in magazines. And I go, oh, that's wrong. That's just wrong. But they're doing clinical medicine. They're helping patients. They're transforming experiences. They're doing something with Chinese medicine, which is specific in some ways to Chinese medicine. So there are some ways in which the ideas and the words, the concepts and the things of Chinese medicine do transmit. They move, and they still have some of their original powers when they move. So Chinese medicine in the United States is a local medicine to, you know, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles. It's a local medicine to these places, depending on who's doing it and how they use language. But there's still something going on which can be considered to be positive. I'm interested that so many of the questions have been about Chinese medicine, and the ad for this talk said nothing about Chinese medicine. How did you, I mean, some of you must be really disappointed that it turned out to be so much about Chinese medicine and not about philosophical foundations of body, you know. Okay.
Okay, I guess it's time for the book signing. We'll be downstairs on the 3rd floor. So Judy will be signing books of all her books translated into Chinese. Thank you.